We'll call the October 4th council meetings, as a meeting of the various council subcommittees to order. We again have a remote or a hybrid meeting with Councilor Wingard, Gardner, and Grenier joining me here in council chambers. Councilor Robertson is remote. Councilor Mitchell has a work commitment this afternoon and may join us around 6 o'clock, hopefully. I don't see Councilor Boucher is not. Okay. So just again, we kind of review logistics. It's a hybrid meeting. We have turned off the chat function on Zoom. If a subcommittee chair decides they want public comment, the public can use the hand raise function, and we'll monitor that. But that's going to be up to the various subcommittee chairs. Let's see, the purpose of our subcommittee meetings is always to better understand issues that are coming before council. We do not take formal roll call votes during subcommittee meetings, but we will take some votes by show of hands to move something forward to council or back to staff for further work. And I'll just quickly say that we have our meeting guidelines, which we have read the last few meetings, so I will not go over them again this meeting. And I guess we're ready to go. And we're going to begin with Finance and Operations Committee. And the first item on the agenda is council meeting schedule and logistics. And I think there are several items under there. Meeting schedule, list of town holidays, and several meeting formats, several items to consider under this topic.
So would you like me to give like a little background?
Please.
All right. So there are several issues to talk about under this item. The first is the meeting schedule. Each quarter, I publish a proposed meeting schedule. We talk about it. This one from October 1st to December 31st tries to take into account any holidays, as well as maintaining the all committees format, which is what we started at the end of August. I just want to make sure that council's okay with continuing with the all committees format, and also want to make sure that we don't have dates that pose conflicts. I am aware that Councilor Mitchell has a potential conflict on the first Monday of each month, but that it might be just a matter of moving the meeting ahead an hour to 6 o'clock so that we could stay on Mondays.
I will, I emailed Laura this afternoon to check and see if moving the time would help her, and she is in our meeting, so was unable to respond, but we will search that out. If it was just 1 month, I think we'd just go with it, but since she has this conflict of it's a group she facilitates every first Monday, we ought to see if we can't work around it. People happy with the all committee format? Yeah, I'm thinking it works reasonably well, and we'll continue doing that unless I hear some objection. Okay, we need to take a look at the list of town holidays and important dates.
Tom, just for just 1 second, and I can talk to Sophie about this, but our environment meeting has been changed to Wednesdays. I'm looking at the council meeting things because we have a committee member who's having difficulty with Thursdays. It's just too long a day for him. And also the TBDs, we've got some dates for that. And I'm looking at our committee meetings calendar right now. So I'll just tell Sophie that I'll just connect with her later, but there will be some changes on that.
publish the list. I'm especially interested in the conflicts that people might have with the schedule. You can identify them now. And I am interested in looking at the holidays observed by the town. That's something that we can't control, when the town office is closed, but what we can control is when we meet. And we identified some additional days that were not holidays according to the town office being open, but days that we wanted to avoid having meetings. And those are listed on page 7 of the material that was that you received from Sophie. Are there any adjustments we want to make to this list?
Just quickly, is Diwali the 4th through the 8th of November, and then we have a council meeting on the 8th, but I'm assuming that that's because it's prescribed by charter, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Council can change that. When we originally published this, Diwali was listed, I think, as the 4th. It's a multiple day event. So I don't know how you wish to deal with this. So council could, in October, reschedule the council meeting if you so choose to do that. We don't normally reschedule for regular meetings, like council meeting.
Any other conflicts with this list or things that should be modified on? Hearing none. we will-
Can I also just ask a quick question? And I know this pertains to the upcoming quarter, but you know, should we also be talking about like adjusting this list for next year as well? For planning purposes, please note and avoid scheduling meetings and events on the following important religious holidays. Like,
I
should we
see.
be talking about adding anything to that for next year?
So,
Or,
Normally, in early December, we review for the coming year what that calendar years
okay.
are gonna be. But if you'd like to do it sooner, I can calendar that,
No,
that's
I
fine.
didn't know if anybody wanted to weigh in on that now, or whether that's something we would look at again in December. or-
It's something that if we knew that there were particular holidays or activities that council wanted to avoid, then when I put the schedule together in early December, I would add them if I knew.
Well, yes, I would like you to add Sukkot, which is another Jewish holiday. It's in the fall. It's from a few days to up to 4 days after Yom Kippur, and it's 8 days long, and there are celebrations at sunset. So that would be great to add for next year.
and Lori, is that something that if we avoided the sunset time? Immediately,
Yes. In very observant communities, the whole week is off, but that's not necessary. But because the holiday, as with Ramadan, encourages people to gather together and have a meal, but for this holiday, for the 8 days, the gathering together to have a meal in an outdoor booth is supposed to occur around sunset every day. It's a little chilly here many years because some years Sukkot is later in October, late in October. But this year was a fabulous week to be gathering outside, but there were lots of meetings. So maybe in the future we can avoid after sunset on Sukkot.
so we'll have to get the exact date.
I'll look it up.
And we'll look that up and dates down. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, then let's move on. And our next item is carry forward request.
Do you want to talk at all about the meeting format, Tom, or the hybrid meeting
Oh.
format, or the remote meeting policy, or any of that?
Not really, but I will. We included Sophie included the hybrid meeting policy with the material that was sent out. And I think we are hopefully moving towards having more in-person meetings in order to be consistent with the state law. I know the RSU meets in person for all of their meetings now. And that's something that we need to move towards, I think, unless the situation dramatically changes.
So I think it's important to remember that the law provides for somebody who is traveling out of town
Right.
to ask for permit. The policy says ask for permission from the chair. It also says if you have an illness or injury and you can't come, we have interpreted that to mean if you have a reason in your home for being concerned about COVID in a meeting format, that would work. So I think the concern that I raised with Councillor Perry is simply that I started to get feedback from councillors on things that we should be doing to make it more like a remote meeting, when the statute's pretty clear that we should be making it more like an in-person meeting, and wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. And also talk about the fact that we are cobbling together technology right now that is less than ideal. We have identified a process to upgrade council chamber to create a Zoom room. We had identified in the budget process the potential of using ARPA funds for that. I have ARPA funds. I do not have the final rule on how ARPA funds can be expended. So the issue I'm working at is if we go out for a request for proposals, that request is good for usually 30 days at the max. And so I don't want to go out for a request, have it come back and not have the money available. My question in background to council was, are you comfortable enough that creating a Zoom room is a response to COVID and would be allowed as an allowed use of ARPA, and understanding that if for some reason when the final rule comes out, it is not allowed, would you be comfortable expending town funds, which at this point would have to come from fund balance because I don't have any money for that, if we couldn't use ARPA money? That if council was comfortable with that, I would put the question on the October meeting to kind of move forward with it, with the hope that we could get the upgrade done and have a better meeting format sooner. If you're not comfortable, then we'll just continue to kind of make our way through and wait until the final rule is announced and then make decisions at that point. I don't want to release the RFP too soon though. If I release the RFP and we're not ready to expend the funds, I have to go through the whole process all over again.
We have a sense of when ARPA guidelines are going to be finalized. I listened to the Maine Municipal Association talk on that last week, and the gentleman who was presenting was fairly optimistic that we should see final guidelines quite soon.
So they have been fairly optimistic for a while. I am more optimistic just because time is going by. They have extended the reporting. So initially you had to have your first set of reports in before the end of the year. That has been moved to the end of the second quarter, the end of the first quarter of 2022 for non-entitlement communities, which Orono is one. I will say that I think we should see something this fall, early winter. I don't anticipate there being a change in the allowed use. However, I don't like to spend money that I'm not 100% sure of without council being fully on board.
Right. Can I have a question? I have
Yes.
a question. So Sophie, do you see or can you see a benefit to setting up a Zoom room post-COVID? So would there be a reason, after COVID, because I can come in, I don't need to be remote, I can come in. But is there a reason, can you see a reason that we would have this room after this pandemic is over?
So this is where you're going to get my pessimistic self saying that it will help us as we work through the pandemic, and we're not sure. We have spikes up and down, different variants.
Right.
Allows for continuous operation, to support continuous operation and transparency, which are important. But I will say we have been pandemic planning since before I came to Orono. I was doing that when I was in Brownville. So we've been preparing for a pandemic for a long time. My sense is that the risk will still be there after COVID is here. And I think a Zoom room will at least provide the framework of technology. You know, that will change over time, but it won't be, hopefully, all at once. This is a endeavor. Yes, Belle?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I can't turn my video on because it's very psychedelic. I just wanted to mention that 90% of the cost of the Zoom room is actually upgrading the cameras and the audio system actually for broadcasting. So we needed to do that anyway, but now it's just more urgent so that you guys are easier to see and hear and are no longer around a table and a single camera and microphone and speaker, but back up at the dais and doing your meetings as normal.
Right. And that was what I was wondering, is if Belle and Sophie, is if this would be a benefit to us in the future, as if, so it's not just COVID dependent or pandemic dependent. I was also curious if you could, as staff, if staff could use this room to do long distance meetings sometimes when you didn't want to drive to Augusta, or you didn't, if there was a reason. But I feel like it's going to be a benefit regardless of where we are pandemic wise, is what the gist that I'm getting.
For the
To go out with the RFP. Yeah.
For the purpose of ARPA funding, it's absolutely tied to COVID and our response to COVID and being able to ensure sustained operations in the midst of a pandemic. But yeah, all of those things would be silver linings that you just mentioned.
Any other comments or questions on this topic?
Well, I love the idea. I'm sort of more on the go slow side, not because I don't think we see a need, but because having gone through my first budget process, I'm really wary of going back to people if ARPA funds don't cover this. So I would just like some clarity on that before I full speed ahead.
So when you say going back to people, what do you mean by that?
No, I mean, I would have a hard time having conversations with people in the community who said, well, you spent these funds with the expectation that they would be covered by ARPA. They weren't, so now it comes out of the town budget, and we have a lot of other expenses that are going to confront the town. And I would just like some clarity from the ARPA people before I'm sold,
I was looking for who you were looking for clarity from, so that
okay,
helps.
yeah.
No, that helps.
Sorry.
So I'm less hesitant because, as Belle mentioned, this is a need that we identified long before COVID. I mean, as you well know, the quality of the sound and video in this room is circa 1999. And, and that was really a problem for the public, and it was a lack of access for the public who couldn't physically be in the room. We also did, when we got rid of the being on cable, whatever. I mean, like these were conversations we were having years ago where we identified this as a need to fit into a future budget soon. And so I feel less, I feel like I would be in favor of expending funds for this anyway. But I also, unfortunately, not to be a pessimist, I think that it's probably appropriate to plan for future pandemic-related events, whether it's COVID or some other pandemic that might come along, as a lot of experts seem to think that this could be a way of life for future generations, unfortunately. And, being prepared for that, I think is really important. So I'd be in favor of moving forward regardless.
So be the schedule, if you move forward from now, you're putting out an RFP, couple of weeks to respond to it. They don't expect to hear back from you the next day.
Nope.
Those proposals are usually good for,
30 days usually.
so
If
we could get an update. We could move forward with an RFP. You could solicit proposals.
Yep.
And you could just check in before a final decision is made on the expenditure.
Sure.
And I think probably the sense is we would go forward anyway, but it will give us an opportunity to check in and make sure we're still feeling that way.
that, I think is fine. What I always worry when I put RFPs out if I don't have budget behind it. But what I hear is in general, council is supportive of using ARPA funds
Yes.
for a Zoom room upgrade. And we'll get the RFP out, and likely this would come back early November would be my guess.
We all set on that item?
Yes.
Okay. Carry forward request.
So normally carry forward requests are simple and oftentimes just thrown on the consent agenda with a little bit of background in writing to council. This one is a little more complicated simply because we found it in the field audit process. So each budget year has a hard end, and you close your books and you open new books. And if you can imagine, the money's been appropriated for things in the previous year that you're working on, because operations just kind of continue. So you have to have a vehicle to pay out of this year what was budgeted for and the funds are allocated over in the previous year. If the thing that you're trying to fund is a service or a service that you received or ordered, encumbered would be the word, in the previous fiscal year, staff can pull that through simply by booking what's known as a payable. And it's a staff discretion, it's just part of general accounts payable. If the item had maybe been identified, but the expense not incurred prior to the end of the fiscal year, everybody could agree we wanted to use money from the previous year for that item. But for whatever reason, it wasn't purchased, ordered, or otherwise encumbered, or the goods weren't received before the end of the fiscal year. The vehicle can't be a payable. It has to be what's known as a carry forward. The difference between a payable and a carry forward is that council has to approve the carry forward in order to recognize those new funds in the new fiscal year. So I booked a payable for pavement marking with Lucas striping. So that's the center lines, the crosswalks. We do it every year because every year we get the bill in the fall for work that usually is finished by the end, by contract, it's supposed to be finished by July 1st. This year, he couldn't get paint, the state couldn't get paint. Then he had a crew that had to isolate because of COVID. Then he just couldn't get crew. And so it has been a real challenge for him. We went ahead and booked the payable because of our contract that said we had to use them for striping, and he had done some of the work. When the auditor was here, they didn't agree with my analysis. And so I reversed the payable. So right now, what I have, I'm going to have 2 years of striping in FY22, and the money for FY20, that was for FY21 is sitting back in the FY21 budget. So I need to carry forward to pull that money ahead, or else next spring, when he does the striping, we are gonna be $22,000 in the hole.
Makes sense? Any question about that? So we'll move that forward, and that here is a consent agenda item.
That will appear as a consent agenda item. Given the fact that there are no concerns about it, I will move this forward to the auditor so that our financial statements, audited financial statements are gonna draft will reflect this.
And while we're talking about the auditor, Megan and I, with the auditor while he was here doing his work, we had a good conversation, relatively short, but the bottom line was things were going very well. He was getting all of the information he needed. He was getting the cooperation with the staff that he needed, and he saw no major concerns at this point. So that was a good report, and we'll look forward to getting the final report in the very near future. He did say that because of federal funds, it was a little more complicated this year than it has been, but that's the same for all communities. It's not unique to Orono.
No, planning ahead.
Next year.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, it'll be next year, maybe, I think.
Yeah, so planning ahead for the FY22 audit that happens in FY23, we will likely have a single item audit, which will cost more money, but it's a result of those extra funds.
And that's, again, nothing to do with how we're doing business. It's an auditing requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to utilization and professional development reserve. Once again, Sophie, I think that's you.
So earlier this year at your September meeting, council meeting, you approved a reallocation of our assigned fund balance to include $45,000 to create a new reserve account that we named Staff and Council Professional Development. We didn't talk a lot about what that was for. You took my recommendation. I appreciate that. But I wanted to just take a few minutes now so that we would all be on the same page. And maybe that's how I need to change my thinking, or maybe it's that everybody is on the same page. But when I allocated those funds, it was not with the idea that we were creating a new long-term reserve account, but rather recognizing that we had brought more money in last year than we had anticipated. And we have identified significant professional development needs for staff and the town council. And instead of utilizing very limited professional development funds that we have in the budget, I wanted to kind of set aside this money for us. So when I thought about this, I was looking at these funds to help fund the facilitator that council plans to work with in early 2022 to establish kind of the agreed upon council process and performance expectations, like how is council going to work together? What are the new rules of council? We have a fairly new council. We flipped very quickly. And I think we came together a while ago and decided that we could all use some help kind of figuring out a path forward that was productive. Craig Freshley is the individual that I have suggested to Councilor Perry. He and Councilor Perry and I are going to meet with him next week. But what I know is that consultants are not cheap. So some money to set aside for that. Also, we have training and consulting costs for staff and the council related to the implementation of operational and policy plans or priorities related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a big part of your plan for the next 6 months or to a year to create the plan. We all agreed we needed some training and some help. That is a costly endeavor. And at this point, we have expended about $5,500 on training. I anticipate another $5,500 in the first quarter of next year, plus an hourly consulting cost for the time that we use Mandy to assist with our planning process. And then finally, if funds are available, some technical assistance with prioritizing and planning the future use of community buildings. So on our list of things we want to do was to put an RFP out for consulting services. We knew we didn't have money for that. When we said we wanted to do it, we were going to look for it. This is a place that I would look for it. Depending on what we choose to do with the other two, I think there should be some money here to help with that. So I wanted to, number one, make sure that we were all on the same page as to what this was going to be used for. And then number two, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we were going to allow staff to access those funds, because normally when there's a consultant, I bring you a general scope of work and a general budget, and you allow me to work within that budget back and forth. These scopes of work are a little more amorphous because it depends on how many hours we're going to use. It depends on what path we kind of take forward. I do not have the ability to reach into a reserve account and spend anything, not even under $5,000. The reserves are held by the town council, and I get to them through votes of the town council. So like one question I had is, if I have identified, say, $12,000 worth of DEI work, would council be comfortable allocating those funds at the next council meeting for me to be able to manage and expend to get that work accomplished? As opposed to right now, I'm working, like Mandy had a space in her schedule. I said, well, 4,000 of it's for staff, 1,000 of it is for council. So technically I'm under the $5,000 mark, which is like splitting the hair very, very fine. And I would find the money somewhere in my budget if council wouldn't let me take it out of the reserve. It would pretty much decimate our training budget. I had a lot of faith that council would let me take it out of the reserve, but that is not a place I like to be. I don't like to be a step ahead of council when it comes to spending money. So I'm kind of curious, just wanted to have a conversation about whether council was comfortable picking an amount, setting it aside, approving a general scope of work with Mandy, knowing that I'm going to likely be changing things up a little bit as we work together to develop a plan moving forward. And then the same thing when Craig, after we meet with Craig, we'll get a better sense of what the costs associated with that would be.
They want the scope. I'm comfortable with that. How about? With that,
Oh, Cheryl has a question.
Cheryl, do you have a question?
I have a question, but if somebody there is already talking, that's okay. I can't hear very well. So Sophie, so this is a policy question, I think, more than anything. when we approve an allocation, a reallocation, do you have to come to council every single time you pull from that account? Or is this just, can you just use this as you, or as staff sees fit? Like once it's in the reallocation, is that just yours to draw from for training? You have to come to council every single time you hire a consultant?
I'm sorry, Cheryl.
No, go ahead. That's all. That was it.
Unless we move forward with a set of authorizations for me, I would go to council every time I want to spend money out of reserve. There was the one account that is different in that, there are two accounts. Hazmat was set up to be more of a pass-through to balance the operations there. And the other one is our unemployment reserve, which I have the authority to expend funds out of that because we're a direct pay. And so I don't come back to council every time to do that.
So what you're looking for is to take a chunk of that money designated to DEI training and consulting and use that chunk for that purpose without coming back every month for permission to use it.
Yes.
And then if we have another consulting chunk, we'll probably do the same thing.
And what I would do is, this would live in not the general fund because this is a reserve account. I would, for each allocation, we would take it out, and when you look at the financial statements, you would see DEI consulting, or you would see community buildings consulting or council development. We would make sure that we have a good read of what we're using those funds for.
No, thank you. That was my question, and that was good. Thank you. I understand.
I have a question, a comment.
Sure.
Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. I'm so glad that we're moving forward on these issues that we've identified as important. The one thing that I haven't heard discussed that has we've said was important to us, but then several years in a row, the preliminary budget included money for a consultant to come look at the buildings to evaluate how they could become more energy efficient. Based on my experience and expertise that in general, when I work on a building, I can lower the energy cost by 35%. And some of the buildings that are owned by our town are certainly buildings that I could lower the cost. And I'm sure some other consultant could do the same thing. So where I had originally offered to do that for free and was continuously told that that was a conflict of interest, but obviously if I wasn't getting paid, it couldn't be a conflict of interest. So then I rescinded the offer to do it for free, but it did go in the budget a few times that we would put aside a modest amount, $5,000, to pay someone else to come in and evaluate the buildings to help us do our due diligence of addressing climate change and also lowering our costs of energy to keep the buildings functioning. And that's gotten removed every year. So if you are, if we are so blessed to have some extra money and we're looking for ways to address things that we've considered to be important, and those are in those two categories of DEI or JEDI, as we were advised to maybe call it, and also buildings, that I'd like to suggest that we also think about using some of the money to evaluate how we could make the buildings more energy efficient. And that also would be helpful in deciding what our future use of buildings are, because an energy efficiency specialist would be able to say, if the buildings that you think you want to keep are going to be incredibly expensive to maintain and to heat, that may lower them in the priority list for keeping.
Suggestion.
I do think that's a good suggestion. I would be interested in looking into that. But also just like to, I want to bring up our meeting ground rules of disagreeing without being disagreeable. The characterizing this as I repeatedly said I would do it for free and was told X, Y, and Z, to me, that sounded a little bit like an attack on maybe staff or other counselors, and I just feel like I don't remember it that way. Other people might not remember it happening that way. You certainly do remember it happening that way, but let's disagree without being disagreeable. It seemed a little bit of an attack, so let's just move forward and say, yes, we would like to include this money in the budget.
Was not,
Under the bus unnecessarily.
it was not my intent to attack. It was my intent, especially, although I missed the training. The training, I assume, would be addressing that when people are different than the others, that the way in which others speak to them often feels like a microaggression. And so although that may not have been the intent, that was the impact. And so since that was the impact on me, I'm making sure that that's clear, that was an impact on me. And so I'm not trying to attack anyone, but I am clarifying how it felt to be me and to have that be a regular response to offering free services.
Mostly just saying, I think it's factually incorrect and we don't have to like get into the weeds about it. I'm just saying that we could probably just move on and not bring those kinds of characterizing comments into the conversation when we're just allocating.
Or people could say, I'm sorry that felt that way to you and that you remembered it that way. And that's disappointing to see that one of our council members is feeling so disappointed by community interactions.
Okay, let's recognize that as a positive suggestion. That's something we're going to look into and see if we can incorporate it into our consulting, our professional development funds, and move on. Is there anything else under this item that we need to deal with, Sophie? The notice of fundamental matters or change for MRC bylaws. This is a little complicated.
This is a little complicated. So I don't know how far back I need to go or where you need me to begin. I know a lot about this. I gave you a lot of background, but to sum it all up very quickly, the town of Orono belongs to the Municipal Review Committee. The Municipal Review Committee has a board of directors. I serve on that board of directors. I have for 15 or 16 years. The Municipal Review Committee has a mission of providing municipalities with affordable, reliable, energy efficient, environmentally friendly solid waste disposal. We did that for many years by monitoring each of the members' contracts to dispose of their waste at the PERC energy plant. In 2018, when the contract with PERC was up, about 115 communities elected to move with the MRC to go through this process of building a plant in Hamden. It has not quite worked out the way we had hoped. The plant was built. It was found to be operational, actually operating better than expected. However, the people who built it ran out of money. And so it has been closed for well over a year and a half at this point. The MRC board has been working really hard to make sure that members still have places to put their waste at the same tip fee. And we also have been working with the bondholders who have the facility as their collateral on the money that they lent to have it built. We're working with them to try to sell it and get it operational again. So that is the potted history of the plant. So as we think about the MRC structure, the board of directors is kind of like town council in that town council has an ability or a set of authorities that it can act on behalf of the community. The board has a set of authorities that it can use to act on behalf of the members. Those authorities are outlined in the bylaws that are codified as part of our joinder agreement, which brought us back into the MRC in 2018. The bylaws say, essentially, the board has wide discretion and latitude to do a lot of things. However, it lists several things that if the board is going to do anything with it, it needs to give notice to the members, and the members have a right to call a meeting if they object to what the board wants to do. One of the items on that list is dealing with the site lease for the Camden facility. So MRC members own the land that the building sits on. There's a lease between the MRC and the owner of the building. We terminate the site lease, and we say, get your stuff off the land. That is something that we would have to give members an opportunity to weigh in on. What the MRC board did a week or so ago, September 21st, is had a very lengthy resolve, which you saw in your background material, that is suggesting that we want to give ourselves the authority to terminate the site lease if we need to. And the two reasons that I think we see as the potential need would be to facilitate a sale, because the bondholders are working through a sale process, and we might need to terminate one lease to enter into another lease. And also, as we go through the negotiation process, that might just be something that is important for us to do. The ultimate goal at the end of the day is to try to end up with an entity running the facility. So as soon as we passed that resolve, the MRC board had to give notice to the communities, which is what that notice of fundamental matters is. It's saying there's something that we want to do that in the bylaws gives you the opportunity to object. So first question that would be on, as a council member here right now, should be on your mind is, do we object to giving the MRC board that authority to terminate the site lease? And if the answer is no, then you could just stop there. If the answer is yes, then you have until November 20th, which is 60 days from the issuance of the notice, to call a meeting. And the way that you call a meeting is you take our 3,750 tons or votes in the MRC world, and you throw them into the kitty and see if you're going to get enough to reach the 60,000 vote threshold that you need to call a meeting. If you need more information before you would make a decision, then I would invite Mike Carolyn to talk with you. He's the executive director and an Orono resident. Those are kind of the two places that we're at. I always get nervous when I talk to council about MRC, especially as we've been going through this process, because I know a lot, and I am always kind of nervous about giving too much information, stuff that's not in the public realm, which is why I invite Mike in for those conversations. So I did get a couple of council questions that I would like to just run through real quick about this. So right now, our waste, we have an arrangement with PERC to accept. MRC has an arrangement between PERC and Waste Management. Our waste is currently going to PERC unless PERC bypasses, which is out of our control. When the waste goes there, it's incinerated and away it goes. You will notice that we are still picking up two separate collections. And we do that because although we had a contract with Coastal Resources of Maine to process our recyclables in Hamden, when the plant closed, Rob Yerxa and I reached out to Casella and entered the town into the zero sort program. So we are right now operating on a month-to-month basis with Casella's zero sort program to make sure that our single stream recycling is recycled. So it does not go into landfill, which some other communities have decided to do. we felt very strongly that we've taken an awful lot of time to try to educate the community about the benefits of recycling, that we did not want this short-term upheaval to undermine the work that we had done. So the difference in price, though, when we were recycling at Coastal Resources, we were spending about $35 a ton. Now we're spending about between $120 and $135 a ton, depending on the month. So it's expensive, but we're only talking about 250 ton a year. And the hope is that we would be able to continue working with that. So one of the things that questions I got was that when we went to Coastal Resources Recycling, we were told that they wouldn't accept glass, and the acceptable recycling list shrunk incredibly. We have not done a lot of publicity around this, but because we're with Casella Zero Sort, they will pick up whatever was on our list before. So there's, I think, some confusion and around what to recycle and how to recycle. And I would suggest you take your recyclables. There's a list on the town website you can look at and see what's accepted. When you put it out in your blue bin or your bin with a recycling sticker on it, that is getting picked up in its own collection and being processed as recyclables. I would caution people, though, just to understand that when you take your pizza box that's covered with grease, even though cardboard is an acceptable waste, you have just contaminated your cardboard. The global recycling market has shifted to the point that the way we were recycling before, we were really putting a lot of extra contaminants in there, that it was more like solid waste. Now that's simply just not accepted and can't be processed. So clean recyclables at curbside get processed as recyclables. Dirty recyclables at curbside get processed as trash after the fact, and they will likely, even if they get taken to the recycling center, will end up in a landfill somewhere. So you should put anything that's not recyclable in your trash in hopes that it goes to PERC and gets incinerated and turned into electricity. So did I answer all the questions?
Sharon, do you have a question?
Yeah. I do. So Sophie, terminating the lease with Coastal, does that mean that the buyers, whoever will buy the building, will not be using the FiberRite technology? Will FiberRite have to get all of their stuff out? And when will we be looking at a different type of waste management system if we terminate the lease with Coastal?
It depends. I don't like to
Okay.
use that. It really depends. If we're terminating the lease with Coastal so we can enter into a lease that's just a little bit different with a different entity, then everything might stay the same. And the FiberRite technology has been part of the package up till now. If we terminated the lease and said, get all your stuff off the property, it would just give us land that is upgraded that we could do something else with.
Okay, then our whole the whole way that we do waste management would have to be, we'd have to come back under consideration again. So DTE was going to come in, use FiberRite technology, my understanding, use FiberRite technology, everything was going to kind of roll along the way that it's been for the last couple of years, 3 years, right? With the exception of the shutdowns and the bypass and all that wonderful stuff that happened. So I guess my question is contracts and agreements. If the FiberRite, we're not using the FiberRite technology, I'm really interested in getting some kind of a compost thing together, as you know. But there's parts of that contract, there's parts of that FiberRite contract that that's really kind of holding us back. And so if we terminate the fiber right technology or the fiber right lease, then if the technology is gone, then we would have to renegotiate a new kind of contract with the new entity, or is it just, we just have to wait and see?
So I normally love to answer your questions, but I think I'm gonna stay with wait and see, because there's a lot that goes into this negotiations, process of bargaining, to try, as an MRC board member, I will tell you, my #1 goal is to get this plant that we know works up and running. And get our trash out of the landfill. Well, I mean,
Right.
we can stop having it go in.
Yeah.
So I guess when I looked, this was not an easy vote for me to take on the resolution. But when I looked at it, I really thought that giving the MRC board the ability to respond in real time and not have to wait 60 days to, if a process came up that required us to terminate the site lease, was really important. You are a little bit further ahead than the board is right now, because they are just working through, the bondholders are just kind of working through the bids that they've received. So I think I hear what you're saying, and I'm right there with you. At this point, I think the fiduciary responsibility, though, is to try to keep this going concern together, because it's more valuable as a going concern.
And is it easier to bargain if the lease is terminated?
I think it's easier to bargain if you have the ability to terminate the lease.
Okay. I'm in favor of terminating the lease.
I'm in favor of the board of directors of MRC the authority to terminate the lease if they.
Yes. Well, it's hard to get 60,000 tons to the table as members anyway, so. Thank you, Sophie.
Our agreement around the table.
So based on that agreement around the table, my plan would be to not do anything.
Right.
Thank you.
We have one more item.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just going back to the last item, my apologies for not speaking in a way that made it focused, and I just want to be focused. Again, I appreciate that we have extra funds and we're looking to spending those. I did not hear anyone comment on whether or not some of those funds might be also put towards energy efficiency consulting when we're looking at the buildings. So I guess that I'd like us to focus on that. That was the crux of what I was bringing up. So the other stuff I added, I'm sorry that it took away from that. And I'd like to just focus on what I was talking about, which is addressing Sophie's description of the fact we had extra funds and what her suggestions were for how we would use them.
It's not that, I think the first thing I said was a great idea. Tom also said something supportive, so.
We will try. I think the way we left it, Lori, is that given the $45,000, we would like to try to include an energy audit, I guess is the right term, of municipal buildings in our work on looking at the best use of some of these buildings.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And you had a general operation update, I think.
do. I was
Sophie.
trying to facilitate.
Oh, no, it'll charge in very
Oh,
quickly.
oh,
I
all right,
figured this
I'm
was a good spot for me to not use my computer.
So I will tell you, it's really hard to look here when people are here. But a general operation update. Had some things written down. So The first thing I want to talk about is that tax assessments went out. We committed taxes. We committed a total of about $13,200,000. So it was $13,164,000 and $164,011. Here we go. That went out as 1,940 tax bills for real estate and 238 tax bills for personal property. The total real estate commitment was $12,893,341. We have received $4,251,105 as of today, which leaves us a balance with 8.6 million to collect. Tax bills are due later this week on the 7th.
That's only half of them.
Half of them.
You only expect to collect 6 million.
6 million. So we are on target. Our personal property tax commitment was $270,670. We've received $137,385. And so there's a balance of $126,834 left. When we talked about tax commitment, I was really nervous about rolling in a revow. And we committed an overlay that would give us a little bit of room to be able to make corrections. So thus far, today we processed our first batch of corrections. We had 3 supplements, which means, so under state law, if the town assesses a tax bill and it's too high for whatever reason, you have a right to change that, to come in and ask to have it looked at. If when we look at it, we see that there's a reason it should be lower, we do what's known as abate your tax. If we look and say, whoa, we really undervalue something, like Jeff's house is only worth $15,000 as opposed to $150,000. I don't know what your house is worth, but I can't, if I have partially assessed, I cannot supplement. If I have missed it, or if I assessed you for Tom's house in error, I could abate yours and supplement Tom's because nobody had, the tax hadn't been issued correctly. But I can't go into a home and say, gee, I should have put another $50,000 of value. It's a gift for 1 year, I guess. So supplements, you would always expect them to be much lower than abatements. So 3 supplements totaling $8,766.14, and 33 abatements totaling $39,268.31. That difference, which the net, so what would actually hit kind of the net impact to the overlay account, sorry, not to the, is $30,502.17. So when I look at that, because when I see 33 abatements, that would raise the yellow flag for me. Not so much in a reval year, definitely in a regular year. So I went in and looked at why we were abating. And what I discovered is that in the conversion, there were 10 of those 33 accounts were accounts that we had homestead exemptions coded for, that when the property was converted from Trio into Vision, or Vision into Trio, it dropped the homestead exemption. So we just went in and we're abating. A homestead exemption this year is worth $593.75. So it's a pretty chunk of change. And then 8 of them were deleted accounts. So accounts that had previously been deleted, but during the conversion, when we brought them over, they showed back up. Or accounts that personal property, we've been notified that the personal property had been removed, the business had closed before April 1st of this year. So overall, staff is quickly trying to work through the list. I would expect more of that to come. Construction update. I bet you've seen Rob Yerxa has been busy. He's on vacation this week, which is always a great time for him. But as you look around, the normal pavement projects that you would have approved as kind of the smaller projects in the capital budget, the Tough End, Kelly Road, Essex Street, those are well underway. So Essex Street and Kelly Road are ready for pavement marking, and then the crew has to go in and fix where all the driveways. So there's a lip now, and if people have dirt driveways, they gravel it to make it level. If they have tar driveways, we kind of try to match them in. That takes time to get to. Essex Street and Kelly Road are in that. They just need the markings and the driveways to be fixed. Broadway is got a beautiful shim coat. So when you see a shim coat that is that pristine, it's a beautiful thing. And Rob is expecting them to come back to put the wearing coat or the overlay on. At that point, he'll be able to go in and fix driveways and such. And that's kind of throughout Tough End.
I walk my dogs down there frequently, and it's beautiful. Like, I don't normally, I'm not being a nerd about roads or something. Like, it actually, when I first saw it, I was like, oh,
You cannot be in municipal government and not make asphalt beautiful. I'm sorry.
it looks great.
Well, the other place to really look, they did a lot of handwork on College Ave, and there's a whole section with the curb laid in. It's beautiful. They truly outdid themselves. So that's the good news. Rob has been, and in the cemeteries, they are looking at grinding up the old paved
They've done the
roads,
grinding.
and now they've got to come back. And so paving is one of those things that there is a science to when you can pave. It's got to be dry enough. It's got to be warm enough. Rob is all over that. And we stop paving even if it's in the middle of a project, if we can button it up, if it gets too cold, too wet, if the conditions aren't conducive. He is hoping we'll be able to get the rest of the work that I just talked about done this year. For our major projects, the work on North Main Avenue should be complete this construction season. That job was bid as a group with Chapel Road and College Heights to do the drainage project there. Sargent Corporation, who won the bid, was not able to get material fast at the beginning of the season. They too have struggled with having to isolate due to COVID and the national labor shortage. So Rob and Joe and Mandy Oliver, the town engineer, met with Sargent last week. And what they have decided to do is button up the work. Once North Main Avenue is done, they are going to stop, and notice will go out to Chapel and College Heights to let them know to expect Sargent to be back in the spring. They anticipate an early start and finishing up before the end of the summer. Sargent is expecting to have multiple crews in the area because they also got the Mahaney job. The Mahaney job, if the weather is cooperative and they have crew, they might be able to do some of that work through the winter. And if they can, they will. And then in the fall, they also got the job for the Route 2 culvert that we are working with the state and Federal Highway Commission to get replaced. So we're gonna be doing a lot of work. In Old Town, the bridge is also gonna begin. So this is gonna be a busy construction year coming up for us.
That's a big project on the bridge, $17 million.
Yeah. I'm glad it's in Old Town. Safety and wellness priorities. I don't normally do a lot of reporting on this. Our latest mod rating came out, we had expected it to take another hit given our, we have had low frequency, high cost claims. We have one claim with somebody who has been out for over a year. And that hurts us because we've got a small crew and small payroll. So that has taken another hit up. When we look at our loss runs, which are the documents that we get that show us every injury, how much we're expending over time. We're also seeing a trend that has us very concerned about mental health for our employees and stress that our employees are feeling. So we have a safety team that is made up of the deputies in every department, and Bell oversees them. And they met, they're planning our annual safety day, which we have long called Safety and Wellness Day. In the morning, they're going to really be devoted to their departmental safety training so that we can get very specific training about the things that are most meaningful for that particular department. And then in the afternoon, we're going to shift focus and we're really going to pay attention to some mental health issues. There's a stigma around getting help with mental health issues, and it's not one particular department. I think the pandemic in general has been very difficult for people across the board. And I know in the public sector, when you're facing the public, that has really gotten very difficult. And so we want to try to give our employees the tools to be able to manage that in ways that we can more quickly identify issues and get people connected to help. So I'm just sharing that with you to give you a sense of one of the priorities that we're seeing. And it's, some of that is translating over, we've had one of our claims, we've had a claim or two around mental health issues. So we've got to really be careful about that. DEI training and priorities. So last week was so much fun. We had Mandy Levine here for 2 days and she just trained constantly. We put through almost 70% of the workforce with trainings, and council received training. Really excited about kind of next steps with that. I also have been working with Ken DeShealy up on campus around trying to get the DEI, Town Gown DEI Partnership website launched. It's a little bit difficult. In Orono, when something needs to launch, if I say yay, it just kind of happens. At the university, there are many yays that need to be granted. And I think it's not a matter of, yo, that looks cool. I think it's how does that impact many different places? And so I hope nobody hears this as me saying it's not fast enough, but it takes longer than it does here, and we're pretty slow. So we're hoping to have something launched this quarter. Might take a little bit of time. If you've noticed, we've made some changes to the website, the town website, to reflect our DEI priorities. We're going to keep working on that. The next step is looking at when we look at the DEI committee's report, one of the things that at least resonated for me was, I think the town's doing lots of work, but nobody knows about it. Therefore, if you don't know about it, it hasn't happened. So one of the things we're looking at is to try to put some things front and center. One that was important to me is we're steeped in the fact that if somebody has an issue, they just need to let the department head know, let me know, and we try to solve problems. If somebody has a complaint, there's a very clear process here to move through. it was clear to me listening to the DEI committee that was very clear to us, but maybe not to the rest of the world. So one of the things that we're working on that we hope to launch in the next quarter is a button on the front of the website that is a feedback button. I'm looking at what other communities are doing, and they're not calling it a complaint button, and they're encouraging just as much positive feedback as negative feedback. I think one of the things that has become clear to me as the world has gotten more active in government is that people don't really understand the difference in the role between council and staff, and they don't necessarily know what the hierarchy within the town government is. So Megan and I kind of started brainstorming the list of what you need to know to work with town. We're gonna try to create something small with that. Some of the feedback I've received though is lots and lots of words make people tune out. And so I reached out to Belle, who runs communications, and Belle reached out to Pulse Marketing. If you recall, Pulse Marketing did a little animated movie for us about stormwater where the bad stuff, enough said. We reached out with the idea of could we get a animated video that would talk about essentially this is if you have a problem, here's when you know when to go to council, here's when you know when to go to staff, here's how you navigate that process. If you have an idea, you know, how do you decide whether it's an operating idea or a policy idea? And if you're gonna talk with council about policy ideas, this is how you do it, kind of thing. That's $5,500. So it's money I don't have, but it's sitting there waiting as we get closer to launching to see if council wants to do that. So along with training around implicit bias, prejudice, diversity, microaggressions, last week, I also had an opportunity to sit down with Mandy and talk about what the steps forward might look like. I have agreed to kind of plot out a potential plan to move forward for her to look at and give us some feedback on. The issue that we're running into is that Mandy is booked with other clients until the end of the fiscal year. So Mandy's not available until January. When I started to talk to her about it, what began to resonate for me as a result of our conversation is I don't know that we're ready for Mandy yet. So here's my thought, and I can be totally wrong. So I'm just brainstorming with council at this moment. Council impaneled a community DEI committee to talk about and to survey the community and get input and better understand what the community thought about the town and what the community's priorities would be about the town. And I wonder if a next logical step for this next quarter would be for us to do two things. Refer the report back to staff and allow staff to systematically move through it, be able to report back on what we're already doing or what plans are underway, look at what suggestions staff might have to augment, and also at the same time as we work on kind of essentially not a response, but more of a mirroring document that would come back, take the time to have some staff members come in and talk about some of the issues that kind of came up several times through that document. So for example, if council is interested in seating a permanent DEI committee, I would think council would want to have a good sense of what the charge would be for that committee. And if they know what the charge is for the, in order to know the charge for the committee, I would think you would want to understand what happens in the operations level so you could link policy with operations, so that we are trying to avoid a disconnect there. So the thought being things like complaint process, how policies are made, things of that kind of nature, we could come and in short pieces of time, give an update to council so you'd have kind of an idea of how our process internally works. Talking about that makes it, as I was talking to Mandy about that, it kind of began to coalesce for me that it's not a matter of saying, you know, this group did this work and let's set it aside, but rather this group did this work. Now, how can we connect that? A lot of that was focused on operations. How can operations take that and kind of vet out the stuff that we're doing or would clearly be in the operations realm as you move your policy plan forward, I guess is kind of my thought. And because I don't think anybody wants to just sit back and do nothing for a quarter. I also know that the more I've worked with Mandy, the more I think she is a good fit for our organization and a good person to help us move this work forward. So
a lot of those, I mean, so much of the committee's work was connected to operations, and and of course, they don't necessarily have any knowledge of what is already ongoing or what has been addressed or what's in the process. And, you know, council has, depending on how long you've been on council, has parts of those pictures as well. There's also the other layer of like, what is possible? I mean, a committee might make a recommendation, but then for one reason or another, there might be, for example, a legal reason why something can't be done by the municipality. There's a lot of fine detail of the nature that we routinely depend on professional staff for in all areas to provide, because they are professional experts in their field. So that kind of technical support is something that hasn't yet been part of the process, but really needs to come into the process. Are you envisioning it, you know, when staff takes those recommendations away and then comes back to council, formatted kind of, you know, not dissimilarly from the comp plan, like issues and opportunities with each of these items, so that it's not staff saying like, no, we don't think you should do that, but it's more of like, you know, here's what we have been doing. Here's why we could, you know, if we had these tools, we could expand and do this a different way. But then one of the issues might be there are some legal challenges with the state or something along those lines.
yeah, I don't think it's at all staff's role to get between the committee that council appointed and council. That's not my goal at all. And I don't want to stifle conversation. But most times, even like with the comp plan, staff would bring the issues and opportunities and kind of the legal and resource constraints to the table for the discussion. And so I don't want to do anything.
That's something we've been missing in this process, and that's really essential, I think, going forward.
Other comments, questions? Nice to have you with us, Laura. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, so when the work of the committee was launched, the council and the town also had things that like assignments that we were all supposed to be doing. And one of those for the town was an inventory of what we are doing. And council was supposed to be doing a policy and inventory as well, which is started but not completed. So I think an inventory as it relates to what the recommendations are and what the town is doing that maybe the community isn't aware of, and therefore it would come out in the recommendations, as you described, makes perfect sense. So we know like where are the awareness gaps and where are the implementation gaps. So I guess I get a little bit like the format of what that looks like. I'm not associating it with the comp plan. I'm associating it more of like, here's the recommendations and how it would look, and here's what's happening as it relates to that recommendation. And so that's just how I would find it helpful to read. But I think we definitely need to understand from staff, you know, what aspects of this is happening, what aspects of this like would be feasible or not resource wise. So I think this is a great next step and fits in with what we were thinking from the beginning on this.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Sounds like a very positive direction to me.
I do have a quick question. I don't know whether, I mean, some of the, you know, just because Laura mentioned the to-do list that council had for itself, with a couple of items that we have drafted and worked on, like the right-sized tool, the glossary, and those kinds of things. I wasn't really sure where we were.
Glossary is on the website.
Okay, good. So that just went, we didn't need to talk anymore about that, good?
No, and there was one other thing that we had said we were gonna do that should be, oh, the land acknowledgement is on the website.
And I guess maybe the toolkit is the biggest.
I think the toolkit, yeah, because it's still, everything I have still says draft on it, so maybe one thing that would make sense for us to do, that feels kind of internal. It might make sense for me, if you're okay, to take that to my management diversity team, kind of work through some feedback from that, and we'll bring it back to committee meeting. I think the next open committee meeting would be the first week of November. We need to just talk to Councilor Mitchell about whether or not a 6 o'clock start would work for her for that meeting.
Is it going to work for you, Laura, if we did the first Monday at 6 instead of us?
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
Good. Anything else on that topic?
I'm gonna call it good.
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna call it good.
Okay. We're ready to move on. We'll move on to Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. Pass the baton to Megan.
Yep, and unfortunately, my laptop is charged up, ready to go. Okay, so A is next steps for proposed rental registration ordinance revision, and yep, there is our Kyle. I'm passing the baton.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So at the last meeting, we had talked about a few different draft ordinance amendments. I think a couple of them they all sort of need to go through different processes. The behavior one that we talked about is sort of still in the kind of work stages, but the rental registration amendment, most counselors present at that meeting didn't really seem to have any additional comments with the language. So it seemed like it was ready possibly to move forward to the next step. So this is not a land use ordinance amendment, so it would not have to go to the planning board for a public hearing. It would just have to go to a council public hearing. So if that was the case, I think it would be possible to do that in November. And in the meantime, staff could finalize a couple of small language tweaks here or there, just to make sure everything matched up with sort of the layout and flow of ordinance that wasn't creating any conflicts anywhere, and get a legal review ahead of the public hearing in November. So if everyone was okay with that, we could kind of set on that timeline. But if there were any points of discussion that people still wanted to have, then we could sort of revisit it and address whatever concerns were still there.
So any comments, questions, concerns, or are folks generally comfortable with moving ahead to the public hearing?
I just have one question, and has any progress been made getting property owners together, like an ongoing group? I know that was a suggestion, but has anything been happening in that realm?
So
Like that sort of committee that we had talked about, or
Yeah,
no, I think that's something that we would probably want to discuss the format and goals of more before we actually started reaching out to specific people and working out any sort of logistics with it.
okay. All right, thanks, Kyle. Just curious.
Kyle, I have one question on the list of items that were exempt from registration.
Yep.
Section 8-112,
Yes.
kind of a picky one, but number 5 is the houses of fraternities and sororities. I'm hearing feedback that there are informal houses in the community that are fraternity houses, and informal,
not allowed to have
Well-
informal.
Okay,
So I can clarify a little that all of the things in this list that wouldn't apply to the rental registration are all different land uses. So the rental registration would only apply to like dwelling units in single family homes, 2-family homes, or a multifamily unit. Whereas things like a fraternity or sorority is an actual land use, so it would be reviewed and permitted differently. So if members of a fraternity were in just a single family home, that would still need to go through the rental registration.
good. That was my interest and concern.
And if we thought we knew that there were sororities or fraternities behaving in outside the university district, then we should know, because that is a
I
violation
believe
of
there
land
is
use.
one.
Oh.
I will tell you about it.
Thank you. I like it.
Well, okay. Other questions, comments, concerns, or we are comfortable moving forward with the public hearing? And I do want to remind folks out in the community, especially folks who attended that last committee meeting, the real, like the vehicle for giving public comment on these language changes really is that public hearing. That's the time when we've got kind of a sort of finished product and the feedback is most helpful to council and staff. So the committee, coming to committee meetings, we love to have people at committee meetings, but it's really helpful when people can come to a public hearing on an item. So. All right, are we ready to talk about the next item, which would be creating a permitting process for homestays, AKA short-term rentals?
Yeah. So this is kind of at a similar stage as the last one. The only real difference in this case is that this is an amendment to the land use ordinance. So it would have to go to the planning board for a public hearing before going to council public hearing. So again, if council didn't have any kind of bigger discussions and it was kind of ready to move this forward, we could send it out for a legal review, kind of double check to make sure that all the consistencies are there, not creating any conflicts with any definitions or other sections of the ordinance. And then we could have this scheduled for a planning board public hearing in November. And then with the goal of having it potentially go to a council public hearing in December, I guess, with probably a committee, council committee report on the planning board's recommendation in between there sometime.
And Kyle, refresh my memory for the Homestead 1 or Homestay 1, Homestay 2 are required to register. There's an extra layer of something for Homestay 2, and I'm blanking on what it is at the moment.
Yeah, so the real difference between, homestay 1 is the sort of owner occupied situations. Homestay 2 is more of the non-owner occupied situations. A homestay 1 would be just a permit in any district, whereas a homestay 2 in the more residential zoning districts like the MDR, LDR, forest and agriculture, HDR, they would require site plan review similar to what a home business would go through. And then in the commercial districts, they would also receive a permit just like the homestay ones, but it's really in that residential area where you have the potential to kind of move on from all residential activity to adding in some amount of traffic and commercial activity that it would require that extra little increase in review that would trigger some additional review by the planning board. I'd say the other thing is that it creates the framework where if the council in the future did want to regulate short-term rentals more, they notice certain situations popping up, specifically with the non-owner occupied types or something like that. Those designations would already be there where you could more easily amend the ordinance.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I was, after our last meeting, and thinking about how we're attempting to be more cohesive with how we deal with rental properties. I was wondering about, the pros and cons of the same local agent requirement for short rentals as well. Unless I'm misunderstanding what I'm reading, it's not required based on this draft of the short-term rental. So in theory, it could be a company from another state owning rental properties here and using them as Airbnbs or some other kind of short-term rental. Is there a compelling kind of reason to not consider treating them similarly to long-term rentals at this point, or?
I think, yeah, I mean, there are certainly examples of other communities doing things like that. I think maybe when we had talked about this initially, that might have actually been in the draft language at the time. At that time, it seemed like the direction council wanted to go in was currently more so just allowing the activity to take place and not putting in really any extra type of regulation. So this was more of, sort of creating a permitting process that would, allow everything and not put into place too many specific regulations for any types of short-term rentals, whatever type it was. But yeah, I mean, that could certainly be something that we looked at or considered. And yeah, I mean, there would be some consistency there then with the long-term rentals.
So I very rarely disagree with Kyle.
Okay.
And so he has full reign to tell me how I'm wrong. When I read the building ordinance around rental unit registration, it talks about rental unit means a dwelling unit, rooming unit, or habitable room that is occupied or offered for occupancy for a residential purpose in exchange for consideration. So does that doesn't really talk about short-term versus long-term.
Well, so in the section that Councilor Perry had referenced before, rental registration does not apply to number 1 is transient occupancy. It doesn't specifically list homestay there, but I think homestay would fall under the similar lodging facility as homestays are occupied by transient guests.
So I would suggest that we exempt homestays from number 1, not including homestays. And here's my rationale for it. at least in, perhaps not in the commercial districts, but in the more residential districts, you have the potential of having the exact same issues as you would with longer term rental. And even if we want to say the permit fee that you pay for the annual permit is covers your rental registration fee. I mean, I don't want to get into fees, but I would think we would still want them to comply with the unrelated rules, and that we'd still want to know who they are, and we would still want them to designate a local property manager, I would think. But I don't know. What do you think, Kyle?
So I mean, the thought I think with that is that all of those requirements, the unrelated people, anything like that, they'd still be required to follow all of that just as a land use, not getting registered. The only thing they really out of that a normal long-term rental would have to do that in the way it's worded now, a homestay would have to do is the local landlord. And I mean, we do have the section in, we sort of divided here 18-131 for home occupations into two different sections, one that apply to all types of home occupations and one that apply to specifically for homestays. So I mean, another option, I guess, would be if there was interest in requiring the local landlord for non-owner occupied homestays, that you could just add a paragraph D there in that section 2 that required that. I think the goal was to keep the rental registration specifically for long-term rentals and any sort of transient occupancy for short-term rentals to kind of just keep the data separated. I mean, I guess you could, on the rental registration form, add a box for short-term rentals and then split it out in the data itself. But if you were just, looking at the total list, then you would have the transient occupancy mixed in with the long-term occupancy, which may, just on like a surface view of the data, make it look like you have more rental properties than you do, when I guess me specifically, I was looking at short-term rentals more as kind of that hybrid commercial residential use.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about the concerns that were raised by members of the public and the conversations we had around behavior at that last committee meeting. To me, philosophically, it would seem that in the same neighborhoods, in the same residential areas, that we would say, a long-term rental, there is in order to curb certain behaviors, we think it's necessary to have the owner be local or have a local agent. But then to have a house that's right next door, that might just be operating an Airbnb, it might also have similar behavioral issues in the neighborhood and say, well, this can be owned by someone who lives in Georgia. So
I agree with that. I think the non-owner occupied short-term rentals should have an local agent requirement.
other folks, comments specifically on this topic, or before we jump into other?
Is that going to be, because I could imagine some of that having a level of seasonality. So is that how are we going to require a local agent for part of the year versus not?
I don't think I understand
You have a camp on Pushar, a home on Pushar, and you use it 3 months a year and use it as a short-term rental the rest of the year. and you're not there, I think that's what you're saying, Laura, isn't it?
But you would
Yeah.
have a little, I
Yeah,
mean,
so.
if you're
so
making
during-
money on the property.
Yeah, during the time that you're using it as a short-term rental and you're not occupying it, you need to have an agent, I guess.
Yes.
How is the town, so is it on good faith that somebody's going to report that?
I mean, it would have to be probably part of their application for either a permit or, I mean, any type of home occupation or home business, right? We ask for an application that supplies us with all of this information. So if it was a requirement that they have this local property manager, at least for the times that they are renting out the property to transient guests, then yeah, there would probably have to be some just agreement or plan drawn up, during those times that I am renting it. There will, and they'll list the property manager, whoever it is, will be available. And then it would be like any other site plan or permit. If that wasn't the case, after it was approved, then it would become a violation of the land use ordinance.
I'm fine with that.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this particular subject?
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
When we say everybody's okay with that, I am assuming that that means adding the requirement under Home State 2 for a local property manager when it's not being occupied by the owner. And then having it go through the final language review that Kyle talked about and asking planning board to consider this at their November meeting.
That's what I mean.
Okay, I just want to make sure you all mean the same thing.
So can I just clarify the schedule? Sorry, can I clarify the schedule? We will have a council hearing on the first. Right? No,
Yes, on the first ordinance goes to council.
That doesn't need it.
right, so that would be November potentially.
Yeah, so what you'll see on the October meeting is us what you see on the October meeting is us calling the public hearing for November so that everybody gets plenty of notice that it's happening.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the short-term ordinance language? All right, well, I think that means I'm passing the baton to Terry.
So
Thank you,
we
Kyle.
have two topics for tonight. New Main Town Economic Development Project. I'm assuming Mitch is going to be.
Mitch,
Mitch going to lead
there he
us.
is.
I'm intrigued.
Yes.
I know this
we
is
all
so
are.
mysterious.
So I think there are two reasons that Sophie puts me at the end, because she wants to limit the amount I talk. Because you guys, we get to the end of the meeting, we got to slow that down. And the good news is this next thing, I really can't talk a lot about. So basically we're in a time issue where we've been working with the university on a project, and we're under a non-disclosure agreement, so we can't talk a lot about that publicly. But the gist of that is that the university is looking for an in-kind agreement to place a project in Webster Park that would really, it's for best description, vague description, it's a interactive educational art installation that uses the environment. So it's a pretty cool thing. I wish I could tell you more publicly. Our challenge right now is that we are working through some things to bring to council, but we're up against trying to get at least the foundation put in place before the winter. So we're working with Public Works, who's on a very tight schedule to be able to install the foundation piece before the rest of it. So what we're trying to figure out is whether there's an appetite for this type of thing so we can move forward with this conversation and look at doing that. My hope is that we might even be able to bring all this information to you prior to us putting in the foundation. But ultimately, you know, I can't guarantee that at this point because we're dealing with lots of different things as we've talked about. So as vague as this all is, ultimately what I'm looking for is the ability to work with both Public Works and the university to place a foundation for a project that will have to come to you for approval before it is installed, and what your appetite for that is, or whether you want to wait and do something different. And I will answer as much as I can for you, as vague as I can.
Question.
Yes.
Mitch, do we have a sense, maybe you can disclose this, of how big this base is going to be, like dimensionally? Can you tell us? Is it going to take up the whole park, or is it?
No.
Okay.
So, ultimately, we've been working on this piece that it's not something that can be put in a corner. It has some environmental considerations for it to be interactive, but not in a place in which it would take up precious, flat, nice spatial stuff. So you're really talking about I believe that it's like a 3x3 base, 3 foot by 3 foot. It may be 5 foot by 5 foot, but it's not a massive thing when it comes to the base. It's really not a massive thing when it comes to the whole thing, but.
Thank you, Mitch.
And although you're looking for permission to put the base in now without full information, we would have full information before the installation goes on the base.
Absolutely.
An opportunity to say A or nay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
I mean, when does council get an opportunity to just make a wild decision like this? I'm actually a little bit thrilled by it. Like, yes, let's do something we don't know anything about. Yeah.
Jeff?
Mitch, I just asked that as you move forward with your planning, if it involves the river in any direct way, one of our commitments under the land acknowledgement statement was that we coordinate with the Penobscot Nation.
It doesn't involve the river, no.
Thank you.
20 questions? Can we ask 20 questions?
You can ask them. I don't know if I can answer them, but you can ask them.
Who's paying for the installation of the base? And if we don't like it, who pays for the removal of the base?
So it's an in-kind. We are installing the base for them because it's on our property. The base itself is being provided by them. Does that make sense? So if it doesn't work out, I guess we would take it out.
Seems simple.
I'm okay with it. I
Do we have an
say,
appetite?
Yeah.
I'm feeling reckless.
Been working on this project with them?
Excuse me?
How long have you been working on this project?
So that's a good question. Well, I don't say that's a good question because I have this COVID timing on my hand and I'm trying to remember when exactly it started because we started during COVID. So at least since last January. And I've been working with this group through the university on a number of kind of logistics about this from start to kind of where they are now. So, and I will say this, what's really exciting about it is it's going to be an opportunity to really showcase the opportunities and the relationships and the partnerships that we can build with the university, and for something really kind of cool. I wish I could just tell you, I really do, because it's really cool. And I think once you hear it and see it and understand what they're talking about, it really you're gonna smile like you are now and say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So.
So yeah, I think this actually plays right into that, what we've been talking about, working more closely with the university. So I'm excited.
I love a mystery.
Yeah. So any other questions for Mitch on this topic? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to my second item, which is community events update for the last quarter.
There, that will be me again. So currently, we have a staff community events committee that is kind of working on all the things that we do. You know, typically during this year, during this time, we look at two types of events, one around Halloween and one around the kind of the winter season, or events that are around the winter season. One of the challenges that we've had last year, there were challenges because it was COVID and there were pretty strict rules about what you could and couldn't do. Now we have COVID with ambiguous rules about what we can and can't do. One of the challenges that we face with, especially looking at the Halloween, is the population that we serve. Being at kids, a lot of them young, the elementary age that, you know, currently a lot of them are not vaccinated. We really are trying to be cautionary as we move through this. So we are looking, and we have some, you know, preliminary plans that we should be formalizing here, like within the week. We're looking at realistically multiple kind of events around that work with businesses, work with the university, and also our own thing. I think you're going to safely see the boo boxes back in a little bit of a different way, but and trying to keep the gatherings down to a minimal, large gatherings down to a minimal when it comes to what we're putting forth. I think that's kind of what we're looking at, the Halloween kind of event. The next thing that would be on the horizon would be the Scott Scripture Memorial Dinner. And talking with Sophie and staff, we feel more comfortable about that being a delivery meal again this year, with staff putting it together and then us sending it out for deliveries. And then as we move into the winter, we really like some of the things that we were able to do last year, because it allowed the opportunity for people to actually do stuff in their own time, not a one-time event that's at a certain time that some people can go to and some people can't, but more of these are happening and you can visit them or be part of them for a period of time, whether it's a month or whether it's 2 weeks or that sort of thing. So your ideas about your house lighting contest, which actually got a lot of traction last year, you know, working with Tony Francis on his Riverwalk lighted area, decorations, things like that, and what other things are going on in the community, and doing more than just one big event, but many things that happen during that time. I think that allows us a lot of opportunity to better use our resources and really work with things that are already going on, and how do we make them bigger, better, and let people know what's going on. So there's more choice, more opportunity for folks to be able to participate. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, but that's kind of what we're looking at here as we move through. We're in the planning stages. We have been planning, we've been working through, and like I said, we've kind of hesitated a little bit on the Halloween to see where things might have been, but where we are now is certainly looking at kind of not looking at larger gatherings, things that we are involved in. So,
Mitch, are you going to, will the local merchants be involved in Halloween again this year?
Yep, we're
Like
going to
they
reach
were
out to try to
before?
figure out ways to do that. You know, it's like I said, it's always challenging. And the other challenge that we have a little bit is that it's a Sunday Halloween this year. And typically we don't change the day of Halloween. So what businesses are open and those sorts of things we're going to work through. But certainly we see the business community as being a large part of our partnership when it comes to these events, because it ties everything together. And part of this is to bring people to our community to show it, which is also part of the challenge, right? Especially in the COVID times, is that you want to bring people here, but you really don't want to bring them all here, right? So how do you balance that?
So The one thing I would just say is that the decisions that we're making today about December are putting us on a path that even if something miraculous happened, we would be on this December path at this point. And I just wanted council to kind of be aware of what the general thinking is. With the Scott Scripture Memorial Dinner, that's something that counselors have helped in the past. I would not want to have council not feel comfortable helping. We would love help. We
I make
plan.
my apple pies every year.
I know, we love your apple pies.
Wait a minute, I thought they loved mine.
Love everybody. I think though that the other piece of the Scott Scripture Memorial Dinner that is important to understand, last year, Bell made a connection with the international program, and we actually packaged up several meals and sent them on so that folks who maybe didn't have holiday celebrations to go to had a holiday meal. And this past week or so, the town partnered with the international program, Orono Health Association Thrift Shop, and the Orono Health Association Thrift Shop to provide an opportunity for international students to come. The town kicked in, I think it's $557, and everybody got an opportunity to get what they needed for their new home or their winter or whatever. So I think my understanding from Sarah Joffin is that we served approximately 60 international students and their families. So I think when we think about how we can build sense of community, I think that's part of what we would do. I would thank Belle and Megan for helping get that off the ground. So that was awesome.
Yeah, I think the Scripture Memorial, if for people who have not done it, helping, it's actually a lot of fun just to be mingling with all the other staff, and it's an enjoyable time. So Mitch, could you please pass on to that team, your team of doing all this work, just let them know that we really appreciate it as a council, and it's not going unnoticed. They always do an amazing job, and how they put it together so quickly and smoothly, I don't know, but they do it. Oh, so go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the lighted river trail was a huge hit, and I know it brought in a lot of people from out of town. And just as you're thinking about incorporating businesses in, I don't know if like a sign at the start of it that like with the restaurants and a phone number, like order your takeout now and pick it up when you're done, or somehow connect people down the path into downtown, of like a sign at the downtown end to check it, just some ideas. But it was great, and I know a lot of people from out of town came to town to enjoy it.
Yeah, so I would just add to that we're working with Tony. He actually is a pretty remarkable guy when it comes to creativity and craftiness with the businesses, because he kind of gets them to do some things that, you know, we don't always get them to do. So he's working with them as well, and we're going to try to figure out how do we pair together to be able to not take over what he's doing, but work with him to make it better. So I agree with what you're saying, and I think working with that and advertising where to park and things like that are also important. But I appreciate that feedback.
It's important. As someone who lives across the street from that, yes, where to park is important.
So is there anything else? Everybody have for Mitch? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Belle and Megan and the Orono Health Association Thrift Shop. That's a wonderful idea to help the international students get ready for winter. And I really appreciate that you guys thought of that and organized it. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Laura. Now moving it on to Sophie.
Me, yes. First, you're all going to be excited to hear that there are no council meetings next week.
Oh, darn.
Yeah.
What to do with my time?
The second is you will see while we've been sitting here News has broken that the First Circuit Court of Appeals has issued its decision on Christopher French versus the town of Orono. It's a 70-page decision. I am making my way through it. My understanding is it is a decision with mixed results. There were two separate instances. One, so we prevailed, the town prevailed at the federal district court. We were granted full summary judgment, which essentially threw the case out. It was appealed, and the federal court upheld the first arrest for violation of a cease harassment notice. So that is in fact still been thrown out by summary judgment. The notice, the district court had said that the officers had qualified immunity as it related to a knock and talk. And the district and the appeals court had a split decision on that, but the majority have overturned that decision. So it was a split decision for us. I don't know, I have not met with the town attorney. I am scheduled to do that on Wednesday, and after that point, I will have more information for you. But where this is still a live case, the same rules would apply, which is that the town council does not discuss it in public. The order should be available publicly. You can read it. I can get it to people if you want to see it. If it were me, I'd wait till I talk to the town attorney and just give you a summary and notation, but we can do whatever you need. But I wanted you, I didn't know how long it would take for that to hit, and really didn't want to talk before I had knew what my next steps were going to be. So that's what I have. That's it. Well, I gave an operations report.
That's true. What?
Well, man.
Next meeting is October 18th at 5 p.m. That would be a meeting where we are scheduled to take formal action because it's a regular council meeting. So the more we can have attend in person, the better it is for that.
In that case,
Yeah, who's supposed to adjourn this
Motion to-
meeting?
motion to
Probably you.
adjourn?
So moved.
you
Second. We all voted.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.